Hi, and welcome to one of our many series of Appetizers for Success. These are the bits and bytes of wisdom and knowledge that we have acquired through our corporate careers as executives, as well as coaching thousands of leaders around the world. Here today with me, as always, my reliable business partner, John Arnold, who will introduce us to our topic of the day.
Thank you, Marilena. So I'm excited for the small bits and bytes that we'll share with our viewers today. And today's topic is going to be how to leverage and manage the ego in the leadership arena. And I thought it might be interesting if I share my own personal experience about dealing with my ego in the corporate world. So back when I was in the financial services arena, I was probably, by definition, a quadruple A personality. I was extremely full of myself. I didn't always treat people fairly, and there's some really serious lessons learned when I look back. At the time I was in that space, coaching wasn't even in the conversation. If you were to have someone who would be considered a coach, that meant that HR thought that there's something wrong with you, or that you were broken, or that you were potentially a performance problem or performance issue. But I learned over time, especially with feedback, which I resisted early on, that there's such value in feedback. So I learned to put an ice pack on my ego to reduce the swelling, to become the great leader, at least I was told that I was back then.
Well, I think we all have been there, done that. Somehow we lose ourselves in that equation of becoming powerful or important in organizations. Same with me. I think the power of any executive or any leader comes from within, rather than waiting for judgments or observations from others. So I think it will be important, John, in the beginning of this conversation, to make a distinction between ego and self-esteem. Because a lot of people, have that. And so for me, self-esteem is, we all have it. It's an inner self. It's that inner confidence that you should have. Sometimes it gets recognized by others or not, but it's more important about the true connection, the true you, the true self that we'll carry and that we should be proud of. Because in my mind, in that sense, we're all made equal. And then, the difference becomes that, whatever degree, whatever experience we have. But when we are subjected to the recognition or to become more powerful, more away from that self, that's when ego appears. And especially ego in the detrimental sense of diminishing actually your self-esteem. You and I know, with some of our own experiences, as well as with the leaders that we have coached, that ego comes from a place of actually lack of confidence. I'm going to stop there to see your reaction about that and what you have noticed. Where did that ego come from?
Yeah, I agree with you that there's a confidence issue there. I think when we take a look at ego, there's also a fear factor. So in the leadership space I was in back in the financial services industry, it was a very alpha male, chest pounding culture at that particular time. And I think I was trying to fit in to that culture versus being my true authentic self as a leader. And I got caught up in that. I got caught up in the drama. I got caught up in the behaviors that, as I look back, were clearly not the best behaviors. They were clearly not the best inspiring and influential behaviors that you and I look for in the leaders that we coach today. So the good news was, for me, there were so many great learning lessons that have helped me become the executive coach I am today. just by the sheer learning as I look back or look into that mirror and see the different leader that I am today. But again, those are, I think, lessons learned. But a lot of that back then, I think, came from the fear of trying to fit in into that culture that was very prevalent back in the 80s and early 90s.
I think it's still prevalent in certain people. I wouldn't characterize it by age or whatever, because you and I know that we have met young leaders too that have a big ego, and I think we create that ego sense of us out of the evaluations that we get from people, the judgments that we are afraid of getting, the opinions and the value of the opinion of others over self. Sometimes we create an image that represents the good and the bad opinions of others, and we always want to be on the good side of people. So we might have sometimes to exacerbate, what we think that identity should look like instead of just being ourselves. So one of my biggest lessons and my best mentors, when I was in my corporate career, were leaders that were extremely vulnerable, that would admit immediately that they didn't know. Now, you and I know that as we got promoted in our corporate careers, and some are leaders too, you don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter how many courses, how many training of management or experiences that we have and how much we know. It's not about the knowing, it's about the being with the people that you care about. And I wanted to, I love Deepak Chopra. Is one of the people that I follow in his thinking. And, he's Hindu. And I got this poem that he read in one of the YouTube videos, and I want to read it to you and to our audience because I think it talks about ego, and it's by the poet Tagore, Tagore, if someone wants to look it up. So I'm going to read it. I came out alone on my way to my tryst, but who is this that follows me on the silent dark? I move aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He has his loud voice to every word that I utter. He is my own little self, my Lord. He knows no shame, but I'm ashamed to come to your door in his company. And the Lord in this paragraph is the self. Mm-hmm. So there's a part of us that is ashamed of that ego when we realize we are in that position of demonstrating, my ego, the inflated ego. There's something very, very hard that comes along with recognizing that ego when somebody makes you aware of it. And you and I have seen when we work with our clients how the ego is not important anymore, and they're equally affected as we start, as we call it, peeling the onion or make that ego disappear, because it's actually hurting the performance of the one person who thinks they know it all. So any comments on that?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack for sure. I love the poem, and thank you for sharing with us. I can't help but think that oftentimes leaders use ego as a weapon, and they might be a product of their environment. That might have been how they grew up. It might be part of their family upbringing, or it might also be part of the corporate culture that might be in. And one thing I want to point out here too, my friend, is that ego shows up everywhere. So over the course of our series, Appetizers for Success, we will be talking with and interviewing corporate leaders, government leaders, and religious leaders. So I don't think that, I don't think that ego rests within only one of those segments, but based on human behavior, I suspect it's spread out across all three of those disciplines in business, government, and religious organizations. So it'll be fascinating to talk to some of our guests about that going forward. I also wonder, and I don't experience this in current conversations with leaders that I'm coaching, I'm not hearing much about the ego. in what I'm being expected to coach. I'm getting a sense over the last number of months, and in fact years, that leaders are asking, how can you help me become that much better leader that I need to be? How can you help me access the competencies I need beyond my ego, which is the space that you and I love to play in?
Yes, and that for me is a reflection that a lot of people in organizations that want to be successful, they realize they can keep it up, because the cost of keeping out that persona or that identity is very costly to them. It costs them in so many ways. It costs them in lack of followership, lack of learning for organization, mistakes that they don't admit very rapidly and cost money to the organization. It costs them sometimes in representing someone that doesn't represent the corporate culture in which they also are trying to perform. So yeah, I mean, and nowadays, this is what I love, the younger generations, they tell you, they don't sugarcoat it, they tell you the way it is.
Yes.
They leave, especially in the United States, in which we don't have, long-term employees anymore, but people go from job to job, actually looking to learn and looking to leaders to learn from. So yeah, I mean, ego takes a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of organizations are working with their leaders to become more self-aware because of the impact that they can do not just to themselves, but also to the people that want to perform alongside with them.
And I also think, Marilena, there's a component of leadership or leaders that have those big egos that they're not going to change. It's not that they're not even open to change. So I had a conversation last week, chemistry call, which you and I do when leaders are looking to interview, more than one coach, and typically it's 2 or 3 of us. And at the end of this conversation, I don't remember exactly what sparked the comment, but the young leader that I was interviewing with or having the chemistry call with said to me, there's a component of our organization that I struggle with as it relates to my own religion. And I won't go into details there, but the next generations, the X, Y, and Z generations, have an expectations that leaders are going to show up genuinely, authentically, and treat people fair. And they don't have a lot of space for a leader with an ego. To your point, they're not going to spend 5 or 10 years typically anymore with a company, with an organization. They might do their 3, 4, or 5, and then they're looking for what's that next opportunity, next organization where I'm going to have a chance to grow authentically within that organization and that culture.
Yeah, you're right. And again, I think for any leader, that we work with, they are constantly working on themselves. Again, raising the self-awareness, not just because this or that instrument, the 360 or the feedback or the assessment told them, it's because they realize they're not being as effective. And when you are quick to realize that there's a piece of you that needs to work on something, and you and I come in, or any other person that can help them internally or externally, then that's what that beautiful process of transformation comes. And it has to be something that they want, not that the organization wants for them. Because, and you and I know this, I always tell my client, listen, if you don't want to work on this aspect of your identity that is not serving you well and serving others well, it will haunt you. Doesn't matter where you go. So it's something that is not particular to the job or the title or the organization. It's about the person. And I think, John, that our job is just so, we're so blessed to be in the presence of people that are so smart but just so vulnerable, and that they want to transform themselves into these amazing leaders, that they want to leave a legacy that is above and beyond the work that they do now.
Yeah, that's very true. You made an interesting point a few minutes ago when you talk about the willingness to work on themselves. You and I both know that if the leader isn't willing to work on himself or herself, there's no space for our work. if that leader isn't willing to put in the time and the commitment to use your word, to look at where they're vulnerable or humble, so that they can blossom as a leader at that next level, there's no space for us to do our coaching work at all. So leaders have to be willing to really, really work hard, just like in anything else. You know, I was fortunate to work with a special forces individual. And to achieve that level, you have to be willing to really to work as hard as you possibly can, regardless of the physical or mental challenge that you might be facing. And that in many cases, that's no different than a leader. He or she recognizes the challenges that they're facing, and they have to take a look in that mirror and see, are they willing to do the really hard work to take their leadership game to the next level and put the ego to the side?
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. I do remember, meeting that client of yours, very special, by the way. And that brings me to a point. It doesn't matter the level of anyone in the organization or the work that you do. Sometimes when we talk about being vulnerable, it's not about being weak. I think people confuse that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I think that vulnerable people sometimes, or leaders that I've met in my life, are the most powerful one. There's an inner power, there's an inner source of wisdom and wit that just doesn't come from anywhere. And I don't remember the name of the author, but I remember a book that I read and that I would like to recommend to you and to your audience. It's called Power versus Force. And it's actually written by, if I remember correctly, a physicist or a scientist of some sort. And he talks about, even in nature, if you want something you notice something powerful, it comes from an inner source that has been accumulated over time. And it's not necessarily destructive, because power, it doesn't have to be destructive. It could be transformational. It could be beautiful. You can be in awe of an observation. But when something is forceful, like, you are a black belt in what karate is it?
Taekwondo, yes.
Taekwondo. Well, you know what force looks like. Than I do. But the physical or the psychological force sometimes that people put into that persona, that identity of being a leader, is just so detrimental. I mean, it's draining, absolutely draining. That can happen to you when you were in your corporate work before. And to me, when I was an executive, imagine me, Latina, woman, financial industry, managing 7,000 people from 23 different countries. Of course, I had to put all my armor on because I wasn't equipped for that. Nobody equipped me for that. And ego flourish. But yet, people call me on it. And I love those people that used to report to me and that are now my friends, that had the courage to come out and say, hey, stop. You don't have to do it that way, for us to recognize the value that you bring to the organization and to us. So I think that distinction is important, power versus force versus ego versus self-esteem. So I hope our audience have captured all that, because those are, a lot of concepts all together that we're trying to summarize here today.
Well, as we close our conversation, I want to share a really quick story. Several years ago, I was given the opportunity to do a chemistry call with a leader. We had blocked 45 minutes for the call. That leader spent 40 minutes telling me about himself the entire time. And so it was pretty clear to me at the end of the call, as you know, the potential leader has the option to either select us or not. And we also have that same option. And when I went back to the company, I said, I don't think this is a good fit. I don't think I'm a good fit for this leader. And to make a long story short, we ended up having conference calls with the president of that company, HR, the company I was representing, and had a conversation about this. To make a long story short, we did engage. I did work with that leader. We had a very frank conversation about the importance of commitment and honoring agreements in our work together. And I will tell you, I received one of the most heartfelt, pleasant letters as a result of our work together that I've ever received, about the impact that our work had on that leader, not only professionally, but personally in his life. So there is a little pot of gold sometimes at the end of the rainbow in some of the work that we do.
There always is. Sometimes comes faster than others, but it's not about us, as you know. It's about all the wonderful people that we have been, again, so fortunate to meet and to help them in their personal and professional development. So what about our next topic, John? What do you think? What are one of the things that we could talk about to our audience?
Marilena, I think it would be really cool and a lot of fun for you and I to share our journey from our previous corporate world into the wonderful world of executive coaching. It would be a fascinating, I think, experience and journey for our listeners, for our audience to have them listen to us, talk about what that journey was like, because quite often, as I'm sure you were asked, people say, how did you become an executive coach? How did you get into coaching? So I think it might be informative and fun to share that journey.
Yeah, hopefully we'll inspire people. Not that we have lack of coaches out there, but I think also we can take the opportunity, not just to talk about ourselves and our process, but what happens when what happens to you as a leader when you want to engage with a coach? What are some of the distinctions that we should give them so that they're highly successful about choosing the occasion and choosing the right coach for themselves? Because there's so many. I mean, I'm a coach, you're a coach, we're executive coaches, but again, there's so much confusion in the marketplace about the potential of what coaching can do for our audience, that I think they should benefit from what we have learned along the way.
Excellent. And as my Italian client says, ciao.
Hasta la vista.